Hey, how's it going? And today I thought it would be fun to take a closer look at the scene graph and specifically this prefab feature example that just came out in Unreal Editor for Fortnite. To get to it, you just go into Unreal Editor for Fortnite, come down to feature examples, and you'll see it right here under prefabs. I'm just going to leave this called my project M, and we'll just go create. I'm going to start this from scratch so I can show you an issue that came up. And this might take a while for it to load into the editor. And then once it loads into the editor, we still then have to launch the game session. Now, what's the most interesting about these prefabs, this whole scene graph, is that this actually runs not only in the play mode, but in the edit mode. So you really have three levels of interaction here. You've got this part of it where you're in the editor and it's not running. And then when you launch the session, you go into edit mode. Well, all these simulations here, these entities and components and prefabs and verse components, they'll run in the edit mode and they'll also run in the play mode. So in a sense, I think one of the reasons for that is it gives you a chance to see the behavior before you actually play, so then you can go back and make adjustments. And in that sense, it reminds me a lot of a construction script in Unreal Engine. And I think that's another reason why they call it a prefab, because it's constructed before the game begins. I notice they don't call it a fabrication or a post-fab, but a prefab. So I think that terminology is very telling. What we're going to do is just take a little bit closer look at what's going on here. And let me just talk about it real quickly. Is you have what's called an entity, and that's essentially an invisible container. It's almost like a null object, but it doesn't even have a transform. You could add a transform to it, but it's literally an invisible container. And in that invisible container, you put components. And components are assets and actions. They can be meshes, they can be verse components, they can be behaviors that you programmed, coded, and you put the components inside of the entities. And then those entities, those invisible containers, can all be nested inside of each other in a parent-child relationship. So you can have these incredibly long hierarchies with entities connected. And the top entity controls all the entities beneath it. So the parent controls all the children beneath it. And when you take that all together, those entities together, that's what's known as a prefab. It's very simple, but it's kind of interesting to see how it plays out practically speaking. So this is what I wanted to show you is once the prefab loads up, you're going to get this warning to rebuild, and just go ahead and click that. And it rebuilds. Now this is what I'm going to explore real quickly as I can. So this initial lamppost here, this first one here, it doesn't have a light component on it, and it doesn't have the VFX of the moss. So that's what's missing from this lamppost right here. And then all three of these lampposts here in the scene, if I select all three of them, like here and here, none of them have the animation, the swaying animation. And that comes from a verse component that's attached to all the other lampposts. Now, if I click in here and we come into prefabs and we go to light post, you'll see there's just one prefab here for the light posts, right? And if we come over here and we search in the outliner and go wooden underscore, you'll see that there's 59 lampposts throughout this scene, 59 of them, all based on this one prefab. And if we click into this prefab and look at it, you can think of this essentially as the master template. So when they start out, they all start out fully featured. And then if you want to remove a component from it, then you take it away. So I had the question of how would I add a light component to this prefab here? If you come in the outliner, this is where you have to look. You'll notice that it's missing the point light here. And the question was, well, how do I add this point light to this prefab here? How do I do it? First question is, where would you add it? Would you add it here to the rotation point because it's a child? Well, no, it's its own thing, right? If we look here at the point light, you'll see it's got the point light inside of it and a particle system inside of it. It's an entity with these components inside of it. So really what I need to add is not a component, but an entire entity to this post here. So it's not a question of adding a component to this, it's really a question of adding an entity to it. So this is an entity, it's not a point light component, it's a point light entity. So how do I add an entity to this prefab? And as far as I can tell right now is the answer is you don't. You don't add it. You can take an entity away, but I don't believe that you can add an entity to this prefab. We can only add components. So if we wanted to add a point light component, back to the original question, how do I add a light component to this? Well, it's kind of a trick question because I would need to add an entity. Well, how do I add an entity? I can't add an entity to this. I can add components and I can take away components, but I cannot add an entity. So what I would do is I'm going to go ahead and just delete this. This is C20. So we're going to drag another one on here. And we're just wanting to rotate it to give it a kind of a look. So I'll just leave it there for right now. Now it's just like all the other ones. And it should be fully functioning. It should be the same as this one. So to add a light component, we actually needed to add an entity, which we can't add. So we just have to bring in a whole new prefab. Now here, the difference is on these aren't swaying. These have no motion on them. So here we can add a component because we do have a component for that. And so here on the rotation point, you'll notice this one has a swaying motion. And you'll notice it has, if I click on its rotation point, you'll see it has a cine animation component. So if I click this one here, and I go to its rotation point in the outliner, you can see I can add a component to it. So here it is right there, the cine animation component. So with that component added, now this lamp will sway, this one's going to sway, this one's going to sway, but this one won't. And so it's all very, very interesting, isn't it? The other thing that's confusing, can be a little confusing, is that for all these light posts here, when you select them and it says edit prefab, it's not talking about editing the individual features of the instance. It's talking about, when it says edit prefab, it means the main master prefab. And so far what I've seen is if you try to make changes here with this particular prefab, it doesn't take well. It doesn't take. So like if I went on the point light here and tried to change the color here, I'm going to get an error and it's not going to process. If I wanted to change the color, I would just have to change it on the instance, the direct instance here. So anyway, what I'll do is I'm just going to wait for this to all update, and then I'll be back and we'll check and see if what's happened. So like I said, we should see 1, 3, and 4 should be swaying. Number 2 shouldn't be swaying. So we'll go back in and see if that's what we see. Okay, I'm back and it finally updated. And what's cool about this is that we don't need to go into play mode to see the changes. We can just go into edit mode. So all I need to do is just click over into Fortnite. And here in edit mode, you'll see, what did we say would be happening? 1, 3, and 4 would be swaying, and that's what's going on. So this is all new terminology. There's a lot to take in. I'm still experimenting with it, and it's literally in experimental mode. So everything is really, really interesting, and I can see why this is the direction things are going, just because it does seem like this would allow you to create pretty massive, incredible worlds pretty quickly. And this is just part of the world. There's a whole nother section of it beyond those trees. So, but anyway, that's all I had for today. Take care, have a great day, and I'll talk to you next time.